Good morning. Jimmy, can you shut the door? So this morning, I'm going to be at the whiteboard still, but in our room today, we have with us Jim Broffett, one of our elders. He is going to be sitting in the class and giving his 2 cents occasionally, maybe his 5 cents if we're really lucky. Maybe his nickel, he says. So we're going to be looking at the chapter on Buddhism. And there's a reason why the chapter on Buddhism follows atheism. And the reason is because Buddhism is inherently atheistic. That was Buddha's view. And as we read through this chapter, if questions come up, feel free to put them in the comments there. And then I will answer those questions. I already have one question that's behind me that I will, you know what, I'll just answer it right now. So that way I can erase it if anything needs to be drawn on the board. So one of the things that comes up when we get into Buddhism, and Buddhism is actually just a formation of Hinduism. So Buddha was basically the Martin Luther of Hinduism. And one of the things that he despised was this idea of these idols and this worship of gods, all these gods. He wanted to break down religion based upon purely philosophical concepts. Buddhism is a philosophy, not a religion. It would be definition, it's a religion, live by it. But if you're thinking about theology, it doesn't have a God. There's no theos. So one of the questions is, well, you know, idols, you know, how do idols work? Why do people pray to idols? Why are all these idols? I mean, Buddhism has idols today, as we'll see in a minute here. And so the interesting thing about the idol is also too within Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism, we also have idols, but they're what they call them icons. So there's a big difference between idols and icons. So icons represent this thing, whatever the thing is. It's iconography. It represents the thing. Now, idols are a little bit different. Some idols were literally worshipped as if they were the god. So some of them were literally worshipped as the god itself. And sometimes the idols were worshipped as a way to respect the god, because the god couldn't physically be there with you. Because remember, paganism, the gods couldn't be everywhere all the time. In paganism, a god was very human in that aspect. They were one place at one time and your idol couldn't be there. So a good way to wrap your mind around idolatry generally, especially within the first century, because no one really was concerned about their God being broken if their idol fell off the shelf. But they were concerned about their idol being disrespected, because the idols represent in a very real way their God. So the idols were more like a microphone. So you couldn't pray to a lot of these gods without having an idol. You had to have an idol. You needed a prayer closet with an idol. So in ancient Roman times and in ancient Greece, everybody had a prayer closet. It was literally this space where they would have their patron idol, whatever that idol was. Maybe it's a city god, or maybe it's a family god, whatever. And then you'd have an idol that represented the god, and the idol would be like a microphone. So kind of like the microphone I'm speaking into right now. So this would be required to talk to that God. And that's how they kind of saw it. So they weren't confused and thinking that this piece of wood was their God generally. There were some groups that did that. But because this was the piece that was required to speak to the God, little g, this represented that God. So if you disrespected this, you could actually break communication with that God. So that's why there was such a high reverence and respect for the idol, because the idol represented the God. So it'd be like back in the day, somebody having the picture of John F. Kennedy on their wall with maybe a couple of candles or something, because they were trying to respect Kennedy. If you'd have thrown that photo on the ground and broke the frame and busted it and stepped on his face, they would have been offended. Not that they were worshiping Kennedy, but the image represented their love and respect for him. But in a different way, though, with the idols, it was more of a microphone. It was a way to speak to the god. So that's the difference between like basic concept of worship, literally worshiping this thing. And there were cults that did that, and having an idol that represents the thing, but in a very real way. So the gods would actually be very offended if you disrespected their idol, because their idol basically was the place setter for their presence. So that's the difference between idols, and then with as far as Christianity is concerned, with Orthodox Christianity, they have icons, and icons are purely representations. They, my friend Orthodox priest Father Ignatius, I hope that he corrects me if I'm wrong, but he would most likely say that the icons are just a representation, because we as human beings, we're weak, and we like all the senses, and icons engage the sense of sight. So if we see this beautiful intricate gold thing with an image and whatever, the Orthodox Christians would never worship them. They might pray in front of it, but it's only because we're so weak, they would look at the thing as a representation of our God, or as like, sort of, for example, if you're sitting in front of a statue of Joseph or something, or whoever, you'd be looking at this patron saint, and you'd be thinking, what a great example. Here's John the Baptist, here's the Apostle Paul, here's whoever. And then you would look at them and dwell on their example, but you would never pray to them in Orthodox Christianity. Now, in Catholicism, as we'll get into later, they literally pray to the patron saints. So if there's a statue of Mary or an image of Mary, they would call it an icon, but they actually pray to Mary, or they pray to Joseph, or they pray to Saint whoever. Orthodox Christians do not pray to those saints. And there's a little breakdown. This book does not get into Orthodox Christianity. Also, too, I had some people saying that I fade in and out when I walk away. All that is just the camera trying to focus on where I'm at. So I'm about, you can't tell, but I'm about 3 feet away right here, and I'm about 2 feet away, or maybe 1.5 feet right here. So the camera just jumps in and out trying to focus. So let's pray, and then let's get into this chapter. Father, thank you so much, Lord, for your grace and your mercy. We are so very blessed, and we just pray, Lord, that you'd help us to learn what we can from this book. Help us to have a heart of mercy and grace for these different belief systems. Help us to have humility. Help us to learn so that we can reach these folks. And we pray, Lord, that you'd help us to learn respect as well. We're not here to offend. We're not here to attack. We're just here to understand. We love you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. So again, like I said before, this book, I enjoy this book because it's fast facts, and the facts are correct. But I find it to be a little polemical, a little bit antagonistic in places. So I'm going to just talk a little bit add some things as we go through. So the introduction here on page 23, it was very, very well done. Buddha means the enlightened one. That's absolutely true. The Buddha probably lived around 563 to 483 BC. That's also probably true. Born to a wealthy Hindu family, and that's according to Buddhist teachings. He lived in a sheltered early life. So according to the story of Buddha, if you go to a Buddhist temple and they'll tell you the story, and I have a couple of books from Buddhism I'm going to share in a minute. What they taught was that it was a rich Hindu family, very rich, and Buddha never really left the compound. They actually had a wall, and it was a gated community just for him and his family. And then every once in a while, Buddha, as a child, would be taken places, and generally he would have the windows shut while he was in his carriage, not being allowed to look out the windows. And so what happened was, at some point, he was on a trip as a young person, and he looked out the window and saw all these people dying in the streets, literally dead bodies in the streets, and suffering and struggling. And he just couldn't understand why. But he maintained his Hindu faith, or at least pretended. eventually coming to the point where he was married and had a kid. And it was during his marriage and having his child that he had this epiphany that Hinduism was false, that there were some aspects of truth to it. And then he set out and he abandoned his family, abandoned his wife, abandoned his child. And then he set out to find the true way, the way. So we see this here. It says his goal was to find a release from this world of pain and suffering. And after 6 years of having been reduced to skin and bones, he sat down under a bo tree, very famous story of the bo tree. And during meditation and fasting, he achieved enlightenment and he became the enlightened one, the Buddha. Now, it's important to understand is that he's the Buddha, the first one, but there are thousands of Buddhas since. So if you're talking to a Buddhist, they may very well have a different Buddha statue in their house, and it might not be this Buddha. It might be a different one, because there's lots of Buddhas. There's thousands of Buddhas, and I'll show you in a minute. Actually, I'll show you right now. So in this photo here, I took my wife and kids. So you'll see here's my wife and kids. We're at Niagara Falls. The photo is foggy, but you get the gist. And I take my children to all kinds of different religious places and different groups, so I can expose them to different religious views, and then we can have conversations with these folks. And so here is the Buddhist temple, and this is the temple of 1,000 Buddhas, and it's called the Temple of 1,000 Buddhas. So you'll see here some of the Buddha pictures and all kinds of statues and shrines. And then there was a room with 1,000 or 2,000, I forget, Buddhas. And each of them is a different Buddha made specifically in representation of that Buddha. And just be careful, because just because you say Buddha doesn't mean you know which one you're talking about. So Buddha, the first one, the one who created Buddhism, he started with the Dharma, which are the teachings. And he has the 4 noble truths, and they are accurate. 24, life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. The cessation of desire eliminates suffering. And the stopping of desire comes by following the middle way between the extremes of sensuousness and asceticism. And the middle way is called the Tao. Interestingly, this is one of the things that we share with Buddhism, is Christianity was called the way. In the first century, it wasn't called Christianity. It was called the way. So when you're looking at Acts, and they'll actually say, these were members of the way. And in Chinese, or this character, it's the Tao. The middle path is the Tao. So it's funny or it's interesting in cultures that speak this original language, they would actually refer to Christianity as the Tao, the middle way. The Eightfold Path, it says here, that combined with the knowledge of the 4 truths, morality and meditation, they have the Eightfold Path: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, and right ecstasy. The right view has to do with the 4 noble truths, as we already talked about. And so this is not relativistic. This is very specific. They have a very, very strong opinion, and not just an opinion. They would say the truth of reality. This is not how do you feel about it. This is the right way, is the Buddha way. And then right resolve is the decision to follow and observe the 4 noble truths. Right speech, action, and livelihood are basically just the practical application of those 4 noble truths. Right effort is the emptying of the mind, directing your attention towards being completely free of this world and it's all of its suffering. Right concentration involves the higher state of mind and being, just trying to practice to the point where you can detach from the world. And then this right ecstasy is this trying to break away from the world and its experiences and cease to exist in the fullest sense, to actually break free of this world and all of this stuff in this world. So it's interesting because the purpose of Buddhism is to break free from reality. They believe that humanity is a mistake for the most part, that the world came into existence and then we came into existence. But our goal as a Buddhist is to break free from the world completely and enter into nothingness, to be completely unfettered and enter nirvana. But nirvana is nothingness. It's complete and utter peace because there's nothing. And he says here that peace is always, on page 25, peace is always at the loss of your own soul and personality. Within Buddhism, there is no real idea of having some kind of longevity. Like this eternal life doesn't really exist in the same sense as Christianity. In Christianity, when we die, we're with the Lord, or we're at judgment. There's some kind of afterlife. But you are who you are, and you know who you are, and you are still the same person. Within Buddhism, your personality has nothing really to do with you. Your personality is just a byproduct of being in a human body. What really matters is the scales, and I'll draw you a picture here. It's the scales of karma. And so you have this idea of these scales. And then what happens is that good deeds go here, good and evil. And then as you do good, your good scale, fills up, and your evil goes, and your evil counteracts. But if you do more evil, then evil wins. And there's this constant balancing act. But this is all you really are. You're just nothingness. That's the point. You are nothingness. You need to realize your nothingness. You need to accept the fact that you are nothingness. You are just stuck to the world because of good and evil. This concept of just being pushed around by good and evil and all these different things. So the goal is to have your good counteracted, and then eventually over thousands of or millions or trillions of lifetimes, you will eventually be by doing so much good, you'll be freed from this world, and you'll see reality for what it is. And this is why Buddhists, real Buddhists, not like American Buddhism, generally, like you see a person like, oh, I'm a Buddhist, but they have a wife and kids, or a husband and kids, or whatever. Buddhism, real Buddhism, is a complete detachment from all those kinds of relationships. The desire for sex would be considered outside of the Four Noble Causes, or Four Noble Laws, because it's a desire. That's why the real Buddhists, I keep saying real, but within Buddhism, that's why they have all of them wear the same clothes. All of them live in these really simple temples. The purpose is to completely break away from all of the world and focus on being nothing. So it says here there's two basic branches. There are other branches, just like denominations, but this, for the most part, this is true. This little vehicle and the great vehicle, that's generally accurate. And for the most part, you're going to see the Buddhism that we're familiar with is going to be the great vehicle version. So it says, yet Buddha was in fact a Hindu. That's why I said he's kind of like the Martin Luther of Hinduism. He was trying to correct the theology of Hinduism. He believed that Hinduism at its core, reincarnation and karma, those concepts of reincarnation and karma, were accurate, but that Buddhism had been corrupted, or that the truth had been corrupted over time, and the idea of gods had corrupted the original truth that was held there, which is karma and reincarnation. And he says he never intended to start a religion. He was just seeking to reform Hinduism. Absolutely true, because Buddha was an atheist. Page 26 says here, for these many people, Buddha has become a god, though. And that is absolutely accurate. You see, like Martin Luther never intended on starting Lutheranism. He was just trying to reform Catholicism. That's why it was called the Reformation, because he was trying to reform Catholicism. And Buddha never wanted to start a religion. He sure as heck did not want to be revered in the way that he is. So they have the Temple of the Tooth, and this is absolutely true. If you can go on Google and look this up, the Temple of the Tooth is where people sit and they worship this Buddha. They worship this Buddha tooth. And again, they would say, well, worship is a strong word, and there's debate about what the word worship means, but without a doubt, they venerate it to the point of kneeling in front of it and crawling on their knees up the temple steps, and to the point of, hurting themselves as a sign of devotion to Buddha. So we have here the sad end of idolatry, which is really good. He says, Romans, professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of incorruptible God into the image made of corruptible man. For the customs of the people are worthless. They cut out the trees. The craftsman shapes it. This is out of Jeremiah. It says they adorn it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nail. Like the scarecrow in a lemon patch, their idols cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. It says, don't fear them. This is Jeremiah speaking. Don't fear them. They can do no harm, nor can they do any good. No one is like you, O Lord. You are great, and your name is mighty and powerful. He says, they are senseless and foolish. They're taught by worthless wooden idols. Hammered silver is brought from all over the world. And he goes on to just say that these things are false. But God made the earth by his power. He founded the world by his wisdom and stretched out the heavens by his understanding. These images are frauds. They have no breath in them. They're worthless, objects of mockery. When their judgment comes, they will perish. So this is a very strong statement against idolatry. But again, this is not what Buddhism is actually about. This is a criticism of Buddhism, and it's understandable based upon modern day Buddhism. But Buddhism as a view of life, this is not actually a great attack on it or any kind of even a criticism, because Buddha never intended for those things to be the case. That just happens to be how it is today. So he says, reaching out with the truth. He says, Christians, we must reach out to the Buddhists with the truth of the gospel presented in love. So we need to be very aware. Buddhism, again, they would not consider themselves to be idol worshipers. If you say they are idol worshipers, they will not believe that. Because they don't worship in the fullest sense as we would think idols, but they do, but they don't believe they do. So it doesn't really offer us much help. But he does here give this great idea of Paul, or example of Paul in Athens. And Paul, he's visiting, and he says, he reasoned in the synagogues with the Greeks in the marketplaces. They took him, and he says, we want to hear this new teaching in Acts 17. He says, you are bringing some strange ideas to our ears. And this is a great example for us as apologists and evangelists. It says, Paul then stood up in the meeting. He says, men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and observed your objects of worship, I even found an altar to the unknown God. He says, now that you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you. He says, I'm going to explain to you who this unknown God is. And there's a really interesting story behind the unknown God statue. It's a different conversation. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by hands. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think the divine is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design. And he says here, he compares it to an image. So again, he understands that it's an image that represents this other God. He says, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed, who is Christ Jesus. And it's interesting, I was reading Augustine's Confessions yesterday in preparation for finishing confession on Sunday. And he actually talks a lot about this concept, about this idea of the unknown God and how nature itself testifies to the existence of God. And for us, it's a logical situation. It's a logical problem. We don't have idols. We don't worship idols. We don't pray to idols as if we need a microphone, because we understand that God created everything. So anything we create by definition is derivative of his creation. So by definition, it's just has no value as far as trying to reach God. We don't need a microphone. God created everything, and he can hear us in our prayers at any point. We don't need an idol to speak to him. We don't need to earn our right to speak to him, like by creating an idol or purchasing an idol. So he says, who really cares? And this is interesting. It's an attack on the it's an attack on the application of Buddhism, and this is absolutely true. He says he was in Cambodia after the slaughter of people by Pol Pot, a communist, atheist, evil leader. He said there were 300,000 some people that were displaced. All of this is true. And when he got there, there were no Buddhist groups helping out. There were no Buddhist groups trying to give a hand because there is no such thing as like the red Buddha. Like we have the Red Cross. It's a Christian thing. The Red Cross origin is Christian. And the point is to bring mercy and love and help and to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, Buddhist or not. Muslims have the Red Crescent. It's actually the equivalent of the Red Cross because they also have this idea of mercy and grace in their theology. But Buddhism doesn't have that because of this concept of reincarnation and karma. Now, we'll see in a minute when I read some of the text from Buddhism, there are arguments within Buddhism for being merciful and for being helpful and for helping people. But there's also a context where they explain that you need to allow a person to suffer because allowing a person to suffer is actually good for them because they've committed some kinds of horrible, evil acts in their past. We would call them sins in a past life even. So you need to allow them to suffer it because they need to. So, for example, if you go to a predominantly Buddhist country or a Hindu country, it's very common to see a caste system like India, where there's people on the bottom and people on the top, and it's purposeful. It's like people say, well, we have a caste system here, whatever, capitalism, but we don't purposefully enforce it. There is a divide between rich and the poor, but it's not enforced. We don't label people as poor and never allow them to rise above their station. In India, though, there is still a caste system that's in place. And once you are in a caste, it is very hard to move up. You can't marry below or above. You're just kind of stuck there. But the purpose is if you are born into a lower caste system within Hinduism or within Buddhism, the reason is because you deserve to be there. You should not be in a higher caste system because you deserve to be there, as we'll see in a little bit. And so he just makes the point of saying that's the reason why there's no Buddhism. There's no Buddhist, red Buddha, because they are allowing suffering as part of their theology. So if you guys move on to page 30, he goes on to say Christianity is not a religion. Religion is man's attempt to reach God. This was a very popular statement in the 90s. Without a doubt, Christianity is religious. So when people say Christianity is not a religion, religion is just the lived application of your theology. That's why Buddhism is considered to be a religion, even though it's atheistic. Anything that has some kind of system of belief and it applies to your life in some way leaves philosophy and becomes a religion. So Christianity, without a doubt, is a religion. But his point is that religion is man's attempt to reach God. That's his point, is that we're not trying to, it's not works-based. So Wayne, you asked the question, is Buddhism works-based? Without a doubt it is. I mean, they will happily tell you that without a doubt it is works-based. You have to do so much good to earn the next level. So as we'll see in a minute, if you are a bad person in your past life, you'll hypothetically be born as a dog because that's your punishment. The color of your skin even could be part of that. So Christianity is God reaching down to man, and God, God coming in the flesh as Jesus Christ comes to the earth to live with us. That's the difference between our faith and other faiths, where other religions generally are trying to reach up and trying very hard to earn the right to go to heaven, nirvana, paradise, whatever it is you believe in. Christianity, we believe that we can't get there without God's help. So God sent his son to show us how to live. And then even though he showed us how to live, we still can't live up to it fully. And so Jesus died for our sins, paid that penalty for us. And then the resurrection, and why it's so important to our theology, is the resurrection is a testimony to the fact that when we die, we will also be raised to heaven, just like Christ was. So he says on 30 to 31, says Buddhism, with its denial of God and teaching of karma, fails to respond to the basic fact that man is a sinner in need of a savior. They believe we're sinners, for lack of a better term, but they do not believe that there is a savior in the fullest sense of the term. So I'm going to just show you guys some books from Buddhism, because I want to make sure every time we do a different group, like for atheism, I looked at why God is not great. I've looked at, I want to make sure we're looking at these opinions and views from the theology or opinions or philosophy of folks who hold those views. So I have a couple of books on Buddhism from Buddhists, which is very important. These are not criticisms of Buddhism. These are Buddhist texts. And so, first of all, we want to make sure we're doing this to learn the view of Buddhism. And we're learning this to try to reach a Buddhist with the gospel, with the love of Christ. So if we're going to try to reach someone, we need to begin with some kind of a foundation that we agree upon. And one of the foundations that we can all agree upon within Buddhism even is one of the things is just the sanctity of life in general. So this is a text, it's called, I can't read it in its original language, but it's called The Extinction of Offenses and the Protection of Young Children. And the first chapter opens up and it says that abortion is murder. And it talks about the expulsion of a fetus from the womb, and abortion with intent is inherently evil, and it causes all kinds of awful side effects for the individual. There's a punishment in the next life for doing so. It says the fetus is aborted purposefully. If the fetus is aborted purposefully at that moment, it has nowhere to go. It floats like a lost soul, empty in space. Because it was aborted prior to being born, it might not have eyes or ears or a mouth or lungs or whatever, and basically or nose. And so because of their idea of reincarnation and karma and all this, the body wasn't fully formed. But this is the different part, though. We would say if a baby dies, it's dead. It now goes wherever it goes. But they don't believe that. Buddhists believe that there is this, in this middle realm, there's ghosts. There are ghosts, spirits. There's a spiritual realm. And they believe that these babies, and they say that they float everywhere crying and weeping. And then what happens is they become angry over time, and they add to the dark force of karma as they move on. So again, we don't believe that a baby that dies in any way, shape, or form, or a person who dies in any way, shape, or form, has some kind of unfinished business and then floats around and is upset and causes some kind of bad mojo. But we can agree that as a foundational belief system, that life has value, and they are anti-abortion because of that. And there's all kinds of reasons. And this is a book that talks about all kinds of things about how important it is to protect children. And then this is a text called Cause and Effect. I'm just going to read some of these things. So, for example, it says, when you perform virtuous deeds, you'll receive good blessings. When you commit evil acts, you'll receive bad endings. And I'll listen to the language, though. Good seeds bear good fruit. Bad seeds bear bad fruit. And then he says that's the law of karma and retribution. Again, if we are going to be talking to a Buddhist, this is something we agree upon. They use the good seeds and bad fruit, just as Jesus did. That's a great way for us to initiate a conversation. They would consider that to be the beginning of karma. We would just say that that's just the fruit of your life, and that it can, but not necessarily does, cause bad effects in our lives. But they would say that everything you do has a ripple effect that has to find an end. You have to be punished for whatever you did, where we would say there's mercy and grace possible. Another example, it says, if in the past we have committed robbery and created bad karma, then we will cause us to suffer from lung and nose problems. So if you have asthma, you most likely committed robbery in your past life. And that's an example of, they actually will go through, and if you have all these different ailments, a Buddhist can actually look at these texts and figure out what you did in your past. And then the nice thing is that there are ways to counteract that. So if you committed robbery in the past, you can just give a lot to charity. The more you give to charity, you'll be able to tip the scales in your favor and counteract all that evil you did. And the next life, you might be good. Forgiveness is not a part of Buddhism, Wayne. I see that you threw that question in there. There's no need for forgiveness in Buddhism because there's no one to forgive you. Karma is like gravity. Karma doesn't have any, and it's hard. Again, this is a criticism I would have for Buddhism. When I was studying different religions before I was a Christian, that was one of my biggest issues with Buddhism, was the idea that karma judges good and evil, yet it's not a conscious thing. But I don't understand how something can judge good and evil if it doesn't have the ability to think. But they would say that karma is like gravity. It's like any law of entropy. It just is. You can't worship karma. Like you don't worship gravity. You throw something in the air and you watch it fall down. It happens every time. That's really cool. But you don't worship gravity because there's just no reason to. Here, Buddha originally attained the state of suchness, is what it calls it here, where sickness was absent. But because he was reborn, he chose to come back. He suffers. So what's interesting is that they leave the possibility that Buddha, a good person, could suffer sickness in this life, even though sickness is a byproduct of evil. But what they would say is that the Buddha suffers sickness because of somebody else's evil. That's the way to get out of it. Another great example, if you like to fight or enjoyed killing animals or destroying homes in your last life, in the next life, the next world, your life will be short. So they show a picture of a child on the ground dead in the image. And there's a child there who's dead. And they say that, that child died, which obviously is early death. And they would say, well, the child died because he probably enjoyed killing animals or enjoyed fighting people. Here's another great example of a difference between Christianity and Buddhism. When everyone knows of his evil deeds, whoever this person is, or his notoriety, we can prevent others and our friends from doing evil deeds by taking him as an example. By doing so, we are generating good blessings. So this is a permission to gossip. In Christianity, we would generally not talk badly about a random person or a friend of ours and then tell people what happened or what they were doing, because we would consider that to be gossip. There are examples of using, like I used, I forget. I've mentioned Pol Pot, for example. Very famous example of notoriety and evil. That's completely different. This would be a situation where you would be going, hey, do you guys know that John Smith cheated on his wife? Yeah. And his family left him. Make sure you don't cheat on your wife. So again, it's good that they want you to use an example. But again, we would not consider that to be a nice way of handling things. Now, this is a sad one here. It says here, there was a farmer who used a piece of string to pull out a cow's tongue. Later in his life, he had 3 sons, and all were mute. And that was his punishment for cruelty to animals. So you can see here that they would say that if your child was born with a deformity, and they'll show that very explicitly in this next one. This one here is a very kind of grotesque image of people with handicaps, like just mentally handicapped or elongated heads or Down syndrome or autism. And they would say that is a punishment because of karma. Now, it might be a punishment because of the father's sins. It might be a punishment because of the mother's sins. It might be a punishment because of their own sins in their past life. So it says, if in a past life or in the present life, one did not live virtuously, and though one's parents may be highly educated, one will not be blessed with virtuous children. Instead, unfortunate and sickly, deformed children will be born to this person to increase, and this will increase and result in unease and suffering. So you can see how a person could be shunned in these cultures. If your child was born with some kind of a deformity, you could be shunned because it would be obvious. Your child has Down syndrome. Obviously, you did something evil in your past life, and you need to suffer. You need to suffer to correct it. Here's an example of, just talks about practicing compassion. But it's interesting is that we Christians, we tell people to practice compassion. This is another example of how we can have some kind of foundation. They teach practicing compassion, and we teach that as well. The difference is, though, is that they teach compassion for the sake of tipping the scales. It is purely for the sake of trying to tip the scales in your favor. It is works, absolutely. Where for Christianity, we do things, compassionate acts and whatever, and we do those things as a response to the grace that God has given us. God has given us everything we have. Our lives, our breath, our lungs, our bodies are all a gift. So we give it back. And we, by extension, are passing on the love of Christ when doing so. We do not believe in any way, shape, or form we're tipping scales because we're evil. The scale is already tipped over. Evil, we're evil. There's no fixing that. Jesus has to do it. But they say in this life, if you can avoid killing and everything and blah, blah, blah. If you do compassionate things, someday you'll be reborn into the pure land. And I'll just do a couple more of these. I just wanted you guys to hear it from their perspective. Oh, here's an awful one. So this one is, if your husband, if you are in a marriage that's awful and your husband beats you or your wife is just not a good person, it says this can be a blessing in disguise. During such trying times, it's a chance to free the chains of conditional love that could bring you joy and sorrow. And it says, recite the names of the Buddhas, the many Buddhas, recite the names of the Buddhas and practice the middle path, the Tao, and eventually by allowing yourself to suffer, you'll be able to break the cycle. And then the image is a woman being beaten with a stick. I don't know what to say about that. So here's another one. It says, not all retributive actions will have their reactions appearing in this life. Basically, karma will end up coming at some point. So if you do something evil now, guaranteed you're going to be punished at some point, even though you might just be living large right now. In Christianity, we obviously would say that, if somebody's being blessed, bad things happen to good people, and evil people win sometimes. It's awful. Life is absurd. It's not going to be good in this life necessarily. There's no guarantee of any of those things. The only thing that's guaranteed is the love of Christ. And we're supposed to be trying to help others experience that same love. But there's no guarantee that your life's going to be good in the worldly sense of good. It says here, and this is interesting, when others know of your benefaction, then it is true charitable practice. So this is a situation where tithing, this is a tithing, person is giving offerings. And within Buddhism, it's good to give offerings. It's a good thing. Again, we can identify with that. But Christianity is different. In Buddhism, you want people to know what you've done. That's part of the blessing. You want people to know how much you gave to the temple or how much you gave to this charity. Within Christianity, we try very hard to make sure that no one knows how much we gave or what we gave, because the benefit or whatever it's for God's grace and mercy. It's for his sake, not for our own. So we give it for God to see it, and that's it. There's no expectation of receiving sevenfold, despite what the pastors on TV tell you. And then there's one more I want to hit for sure. This has to do with so here, if in the past we covered up the Buddha's brilliance, if we somehow in some way, shape, or form hindered Buddha from being glorified, you'll be born with dark and ugly complexion. So the image is like an Asian person with very dark skin and probably some kind of acne or something. And they would consider that to be a sign that you did not respect the Buddha. Now you can imagine how that would go over nowadays. It's very similar to the Mormonism's view that dark skin was a testimony to the fact that you fought against God in the previous life you had. It's same thing. That's why black folks were not allowed into the Mormon temple until the 70s when God changed his mind. All diseases are actually caused by, and this will be the last one, by some thoughts and bad karma. All sickness of any kind is a manifestation of the mind. The end. So this is a book of Buddhism. It is not my opinion. I'm not like trying to, I'm not making that stuff up. That's not written by someone who is anti-Buddhist. That is a Buddhist text. I got it from the Buddhist temple when I was there. I have a lot of those kinds of things in my office because I want to know the opinions of the people who actually believe those things. And those are some great examples of how their theology kind of functions. And you can see how they, have this logical timeline of how the world works, why karma happens, and what the purpose of doing good deeds is for. Because it's nice, you get to do good and do less evil. So those are things that we can try to focus on when we're talking to a Buddhist, if we're trying to relay some information. So I'm going to give it just a moment, and then I'm going to tell a story about a couple of conversations I had. So I'm going to give it a moment for questions. Jim, do you have any questions as long as you're in the room?
Is there any evidence of reincarnation? Because that's big in their religion.
Sure.
Their beliefs. Okay.
So you guys can't hear Jim, but Jim asked, is there any proof or any evidence for reincarnation? There is nothing. Everything that is all of the evidence, and I've done a lot of research into this, the only evidence there is anecdotal. It's always something along the lines of somebody died and then somebody was born with a similar personality and the same mole on their head, just things like that. Or people, a lot of the evidence is people remembering their past lives. So you'll see that within Spiritism as well, and the New Age movement. You'll see that a lot where a person's a spiritist, or they'll consider themselves to be a time traveler. But what they're actually saying oftentimes is that they can remember their reincarnated past. So within Buddhism, I didn't read it, but within this text here, so I've read all these books. It talks about how it actually mentions that if you are a Buddhist and you have actually achieved Dharma or achieved all of the things you need to achieve, you can actually remember your past lives for the past 140 million years or something. It's a lot of past lives. I can't even remember what I did last week. But anyway, so yeah, there's no evidence for reincarnation. But in the defense of anybody listening, somebody might say, well, where's the proof of God's existence? And I'd say, look around, but it's very different. But yeah, so reincarnation doesn't have any evidence or proof, as we would consider evidence or proof. But I would not use that as a argument against it, just because you're not going to get anywhere with it, because they'll just say you have to have faith or something. Anybody else? But that question will kind of come up in a minute. Okay, so I have no questions. So here's, first of all, when I was in college, brand new believer, some Buddhist monks had come to sing for our school. And what do you think the Christians did, Jim? Protested. They protested. Yeah. Jim said that's too bad because it's ridiculous. So the monks were there to sing for us, and they spent a lot of time making signs and printing pamphlets. And as we were sitting in line, my wife and I were in music appreciation or something, and we had to take the class. It was the only class that it was only one of two classes she and I had together. We had to go to concerts, and that was one of the concerts. And as we were sitting in line, we were being told about how evil this Buddhism was and how evil these people were. And I had the tract, and I've lost the tract, and I regret it because it was such a ridiculous and amazing thing to keep. This was the argument. why should you? And within the Buddhist monks, they don't sing words. It's all very guttural. It's this certain kind of singing that comes from very low in your vocal folds, and there's no worship to it because there's no God to worship. It's just noise. It's sound, and it's beautiful sounding. And because there's no God to worship, they're not preaching atheism. There's nothing within the song that you can really disagree with. Their argument for how evil Buddhist music was because compared to Christmas music, it didn't sound as pretty. Completely ridiculous and absurd. And I had the tract, and I regret losing it. But it basically said, as you listen to this music, compare it to the words of this hymn, compare it to the sound of Christmas music on Christmas morning. And it was all this stuff. And I'm going, who cares? That'd be, if I went to a rock concert and then you brought me a gospel track that said, listen to the gospel, the Southern gospel music, and how it compares to rock and roll. Oh my gosh, obviously it's evil. I mean, that's not an argument. That's just your preference. Music, a person's appreciation of music is a preference. And obviously has nothing to do with the Bible, has nothing to do with the love of God. If those folks, what they should have done, if they're going to spend so much time trying to reach people, they should have offered to carry the people's bags, help maybe pay for their room, go visit them, have a cup of coffee, take them for a tour of town. None of that happened. That would have been great. And then last but not least, I took my kids to that Buddhist temple. So I took my children to the Buddhist temple. We had a great time. And at the Buddhist temple, we walked around and I let my kids ask all kinds of questions. And my kids just really enjoy doing that kind of stuff. And, because that's what we do. So we were walking along in this Buddhist in training. He's an acolyte. He was giving us tours. I was able to ask him some of these questions. And one of the questions I asked him, and this is one of the most interesting questions that I could think of, is there are only so many souls. That's what Buddhism teaches. Buddhism teaches that there is no creation happening. There's only entropy, and the laws of good and evil. And people are slowly but surely breaking free from this world and going into nirvana. But there's only so many made. When the world Big Bang happened, life came into existence, and then whatever. Anyway, so I said, if that's true, how do you explain the growth in population? If there are only so many souls, then and souls are slowly but surely being absorbed into nirvana, you would see a decline in population. You wouldn't see an increase. And I thought for sure he was going to say something like, well, animals or bugs, maybe. I haven't found anything within Buddhism that says that people are reincarnated into bugs, but they do believe they're reincarnated into animals. So for example, within Buddhism, you don't eat meat. And I didn't read it, but in that book, it says something along the lines of, you don't eat meat because you could inadvertently eat a son or a daughter or a grandparent, because you don't want to eat your grandparent, so you don't eat meat. And that's fine. They don't want to eat meat. But he didn't say that. So he sat there and thought about it. And then he says, now that we know that there are other dimensions and possible universes, who knows? And so his argument was basically based upon quantum mechanics. There's the possibility of string theory and other universes. So there could be almost an infinite number of human lives or souls or life forms around the universe coming in and out of our reality. There it is. So I didn't find that very satisfying. But anyway, so that was one of the questions we asked. And then also too, there are very specific things you can do with a Buddha. So they were selling all these Buddhas, and you could buy Buddhas. And we were there with my mom. My mom is not a believer. God bless her. I love her very much. And she wants very hard to help my brother who was struggling to have a child at that time. And the Buddhist guy my mom was just having a conversation with him. And she said, oh, my other son couldn't come. They're actually trying to have a baby. And he offered the Buddha of fertility. And he prescribed my mom to buy the Buddha of fertility and to have my brother rub its ears or its feet, I forget. And then after rubbing its ears or its feet or whatever for so long, they'd eventually get pregnant. My mom didn't have enough money to buy the idol and asked if she could borrow the money from me. And I said, no, I'm not going to give you money to buy an idol. I said, Mom, you're not even a Buddhist. She's like, well, whatever, if it helps. I'm like, it doesn't help. It's just an idol. And so the guy told us that if you rub its ears, you can get wealth. If you rub its belly, you can get this. If you rub its this, if you rub its feet, and all these different things. It says it could get all these different things. And it depends on what Buddha you have, but generally speaking, it's the stereotypical fat Buddha that we see, which is interesting because the original Buddha, as we saw in the story, fasted to the point of almost dying. So he would have been a very scrawny person for all of his life after becoming a Buddhist, because he would have been in constant form of fasting, just constantly trying to distance himself from food, because he wouldn't want to eat a ton of food because food would be a desire. So he'd be eating very plain food and very little of it. The big fat Buddha just doesn't make sense within the Dharma and within the philosophy of Buddhism, but that's the one you normally see, and it's supposed to be like this representation of wealth and prosperity and good, and that's why he's overweight. Because remember, you're talking thousands of years ago. If you were overweight, it was a way for you to show how wealthy you were, because people couldn't be overweight back then unless you had food to excess. So the average person would never be overweight because you couldn't afford to have that kind of food. But if you were overweight and could walk around and show how ginormous you were, especially with the big Buddha, because he was so big that you could barely walk, he'd have to be paraded around on a cart. That was a way for you to show how wealthy you were. And so it represents wealth and prosperity. Anyway, so any other questions, Jim? Nope. Anybody else? We're going to shut down early. I'll leave you with this. When I was at the Buddhist temple and they were telling us you could rub his ears and rub his feet and rub the top of his head, and you could get all kinds of things, I asked what would happen if I rubbed his nipples, because I was curious, because he has very, very big chest. And the Buddhist monk said, I've never had anybody ask me that, and I don't know. So if anybody out there has one of those statues and wants to try rubbing those things for a while, let me know what comes of it, because I could pass that information on to my friend at the Buddhist temple. But I wasn't trying to be rude. I was genuinely curious, because every part of the body, the arms, the feet, the hands, the ears, the top of the head, all had some kind of significance. And I'm like, these things are, he's basically a naked Buddha. I genuinely wanted to know, like, what would that do? I guess nothing. So anyway, again, be respectful. We're trying to understand people's views. Feel free to ask questions. Go and have a conversation with a Buddhist. Ask them questions. Be respectful. We're trying to love people into the kingdom, not beat them into the kingdom. And try to remember compassion, value of life. Those are, and then like the idea of planting good seeds and bearing good fruit. Those are all things we share with the Buddhist. So focus on those things when you're having conversations with your friend or that new person you meet. All right. God bless you guys and have a great day.
How are people asking you questions?